Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family tree.
Welcome, listeners, to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And today we're looking at the genealogy of Gaelic clans, and particularly focusing on the Mannion clan, with our guest, Dr Joe Mannion. The genealogy of Gaelic clans and its sources, records and evidence provides a wealth of information for the genealogist in Ireland, because it sources and records genealogical evidence required for those wishing to source their ancestry prior to the 18th century. Dr Joe Mannion, who holds a PhD in history from the National University of Ireland in Galway, was awarded his doctorate for a dissertation on the 16th century Tudor lordships of the Burkes of Clann Uí and the O'Kellys of Uí Mhainnín in the modern-day counties of Galway and Roscommon. The principal primary sources used in the compilation of his work were the English state paper collections, which contained an abundance of original information relating to the family history of the Burkes and the O'Kellys, as well as the more important Gaelic and English families around the country at the time. Joe's wonderful in-depth historical research has focused primarily on the medieval and early modern periods, and I know you're really going to enjoy our interview with Joe today. So welcome, Joe, to the Genealogy Radio Show.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Delighted to be here.
Oh, you're very welcome indeed, and your work is fascinating. Can we just talk a little bit about the Mannion clan, the origins of the Mannion name?
Well, the name itself comes from Mannion, which was it was the name of a 10th century local king in East Galway, Mannion, son of Flannaura. The name itself, as Mannion, didn't come into use until the 18th century or thereabouts. But the O'Mannion people were descended from a local people called the Sogan. Now, the early genealogies will tell us that the Sogan descended from a very early band of people to have settled in Ireland called the Crihan. Now, at one time, the Crihan were deemed to be the earliest settlers, the earliest Celtic settlers to have reached Ireland, although the use of the term Celtic today is rather frowned upon. Nevertheless, what it does tell us is that the O'Mannion people are descended from a very early group of people who settled in Ireland sometime about the 6th century BC or thereabouts. Now, we're told that there's an origin legend for the Sogan. It's contained in a late 14th century Book of Imania, in a poem which is made up of 64 quatrains. It begins with the line Cruas Connacht Clann Sogan. Now, in that poem, we're told that the Sogan descended from an Ulster prince called Sogan Saul Bui. Apparently he was the son of the 37th King of Ulster. And Sogan Saul Bui is reputed to have been granted a territory in Connacht by the legendary Queen Maeve. Now, again, tradition would tell us that Queen Maeve lived sometime about the time of the birth of Christ. So that would tell us that the ancestors of the O'Mannion people, who were later known as the Sogan, that they actually settled in South Connacht, which later became East Galway, about the time of the birth of Christ. Now, yes, Lorna.
And for our listeners, when you say East Galway, what land are you talking about there? What places?
Yes, well, first and foremost, the county of Galway, as most people would know, came into existence in 1569. It was actually in the 16th century. So what we're talking about prior to that are a whole group of territories. And the territory that was occupied by the Sogan in the early medieval period, stretched from the Clare River in the west right across East Galway today as far as the Suck, that would be as far as Ballinasloe. And the southern portion would have been along the Rafford and Ballinew rivers, in other words, from about Kiltulla, northwards as far as the Grange and Shiven rivers, as far north, if you like, as Mount Bellew. So there's a whole section of East Galway contained in the territory of Sogan, about 1/5 of the current county of Galway.
And we could call it the Kingdom of Sogan or the Tua
Indeed
of Sogan. That's very interesting. And just for our listeners, Tuas and kingdoms are very important because this is the way the ruling dynasts or dynasties operate prior to the Tudor conquest, especially prior to the Tudor conquest. So they inherit through a system that isn't eldest son inheritance, it's elective, where it's done out of a deireadh finne. So you could have a common great-grandfather and be a pool that would be eligible for election and so on, and you'd have a tánaiste and petty chieftains and quite a lot of internecine warfare and so on. Mm-hmm. For this time, I don't know, were the Mannions as bloodthirsty as the McNamaras, Joe?
Well, we know from the Book of Emmanuel and particularly from also from the Book of Lecan that the O'Mannion people were actually wonderful warriors, and there were a number of quotations. In actual fact, I've included some of them in the little booklet that I brought out last year on the Mannion clan. One of them goes, "It's around the Sogan that all assemble to the conflict, for they are the body of every battlefield to all." So that would indicate that they were...
Yes, and that they were getting their resources from the provision of military might as well.
Indeed, that is right. And we find actually in some of the bardic poetry from the time of Brian Brew later on that they were indeed being rewarded with, we'll say, the praise of battle for their contribution.
And for our listeners, sources for these bardic poetry, a lot of it is, there's some wonderful sources in the Royal Irish Academy online.
Yes, the Royal Irish Academy indeed there's a wealth of information there.
And you'd look for bardic poetry and you'd be able to gain information about these Gaelic families and so on.
That is true, and again, some of this has already been published, so it would be to be found in the printed sources, you know.
Now, I see a point in your history where you have dwelt in the adjoined parish of Monivea until the mid-14th century, and then what happens? Diarmid O'Kelly do the O'Kellys do something?
Well, the O'Kellys descended from a group of people called the Emania. Now, they settled in East Galway and indeed South Roscommon as well, about, we'd say, at the time of St. Patrick, so you're talking about the 5th century or thereabouts. And they were a strong group of people who exerted influence over the local people who were already there, including the Sogan people, the ancestors of the O'Mannions. Now, this continued for 1,000 years or so. They continued to exert this influence over the local people there. So the O'Mannion people, when they came along, they were actually subservient to the O'Kellys. Now, initially, the Clann, that would be the direct sept that the O'Mannion people descended from. They were located about Athenry, and indeed Ornery, the ford of the kings. There were no other kings there other than the O'Mannion kings, so it's quite likely that Athenry, Ornery, was actually called after the O'Mannion and the Sogan kings. They were replaced there in the Athenry area during the reign of the great Turlough Mór O'Connor. This is when he reigned as High King of Ireland in the first half of the 12th century. And they were replaced there by the Clann Uí. So they continued to, if you like, dwell or exist in the adjoining parish of Monivea, and until about the middle of the 14th century, when the O'Kelly chieftain at the time, a man by the name of Diarmid O'Kelly, he was expanding and was interested in expanding northwards, and he captured the stronghold of the O'Mannion people at Clogher, which was in the parish of Monivea, He hanged the O'Mannion chieftain at the time, and then he forced the people to move eastwards across the Killarcrotha River into the adjoining parishes of Mylagh and Killascobe. And this is where we find them in the Tudor period, when the English records become available. They're located in the parishes of Mylagh and Killascobe, with a few townlands in the adjoining parish of Abbeynockmoy also.
So they've actually been expulsed by the O'Kellys then?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is something, annexation, conquest, expulsion by Gaelic clans, which I know you have been a leading light in doing that research, and I'm following you with looking at those expulsions by the McNamaras as well.
That's right.
And it's so significant because it shows a distinct knowledge of bounded territory and limits on landscape, which is fascinating because we're led to believe that Tuas had these flexible boundaries, and it may not be quite the case. So the ruling branch then established themselves in Killascobe parish.
Yes, indeed, the ruling branch of the O'Mannion clan.
Did they build many castles?
There are 2 castles that we know of, 2 castles that are recorded. Now, there is a hint that there may have been maybe as many as 2 others, but there was a record or a survey carried out in 1574, which you would be very familiar with yourself, Lauren, and that is the survey of the castles and the gentlemen of Connacht and so forth in 1574. And at that particular time, the O'Mannion chieftain was based in Menla. That's the village of Menla. The original name was Clann Uí Mhainnín, which would be the small lake or loch of O'Mannion. And they had a second castle in the adjoining parish of Mylagh. This castle was called Clann. Now, the castle of Clann, we find that document is owned or held by a gentleman by the name of Chairperson Mannion, and he turns up in the annals a few years later, in 1581 actually, when he is killed in an internal dispute among the O'Kellys themselves.
Oh, did they assassinate him?
I think he was a victim of the dispute between the O'Kellys themselves. At the time, Malachlin O'Kelly, who would have been the leading O'Kelly in the barony of Tyquin, he was also killed. So I think it was as an assistant, or if you like, as a supporter of Malachlin O'Kelly that he was killed.
Yes, and you do, what I would come across a lot of is chieftains who aren't being deemed to coming up to the mark are assassinated.
Yes.
By their followers.
Yes.
And they're blamed for everything. There's a blame game going on. For example, if the harvest fails, if things go wrong, if they lose, they start to... You have to be a winner all the time.
That's right, and that was traditional, of course.
Yes. So
yes.
That's something to note for our listeners when they're reading these. It isn't so much that they're bloodthirsty. It's just the tradition and the culture and the whole aspect of success is deemed on being blame-free, if you like, and being in control of the weather as well.
Indeed.
For harvest. So I see, Joe, you're a founding member and historian of the Mannion Clan Association. So tell us a little bit about that organisation. In
2014, I got together a group of interested O'Mannion people who wanted to promote, like myself, they wanted to promote the history of the Mannion clan. So I had been researching for more than 4 decades indeed in the primary sources, and I had gathered together an awful lot of information. So and recorded and published some of it in articles here and there, although most of it remains to be published. So we were interested in perpetuating the unique history and cultural and archaeological heritage, indeed, of the ancient O'Mannion clan of County Galway. So we formed the clan, and we registered it with Clans of Ireland, which is an umbrella group, which promotes the interests of the clans of Ireland throughout Ireland. And we also had an outing in Clann Uí Mhainnín, which is most interesting indeed, because I delivered a lecture entitled The Mannion Clan of County Galway, Warriors, Chieftains and Kings, to a gathering of about 200 Mannions and their friends in the community centre in Menla during Heritage Week 2014. Now that would have been the first time in 360 years that any substantial number of Mannions had gathered together. So on the 360th anniversary, if you like, of the Mannions being dispersed during the Cromwellian confiscations, we got together in Menla, and as I said, we had a wonderful night. We have continued on then. Last year we had our second gathering. This time we had it in Abbeynock, and in preparation for that I compiled a booklet entitled the Mannion Clan Historical Trail, a guide to residential, ceremonial and burial sites. It's not a large booklet. It's about 24, 28 pages, including the cover. But it has an immense amount of information incorporated into it, in that there's a clan chronology covering the period from 500 or 600 BC right up to present times, and a brief history as well of the Mannion clan during the early medieval and late medieval into early modern times. And as well as that, the second half of the booklet itself contains the extant information, historical information, on the principal sites that were associated with the Mannion clan in late medieval times. In other words, places such as Menla that I mentioned already, Clann Uí Mhainnín, and
beautiful.
Also,
and that really helps us read the landscape.
Oh, indeed.
It's such a wonderful legacy of being able to, and that's what I really like about your work, that you can read the landscape at the end of it, and it just gives so much of the history of the names and the clans and so on, which is a vital part of our heritage and culture. So you've got preparations for the third annual Mannion Clan. Indeed,
we have another gathering, this third one, coming up again at the beginning of Heritage Week on the 19th and 20th of August. And word has spread, of course, in the meantime. We have made great efforts to spread it ourselves as well through social media and the likes. And we have a 2-day event. On Friday we have, first of all, we have a lecture series, if you like, where we have 2 lectures. I will be giving a lecture on the history of the Mannion clan myself, and we also have a gentleman who is flying in, Chris Mannion. He's coming in from Merseyside, and he's going to speak to us about his grandfather, who was involved in the capture of Heinrich Himmler.
That's brilliant.
In 1945. So this is going to be followed then by music, Irish music, singing, dancing, and we even have a local Shanachie who is related to the Mannion people, because he is Ward by his surname is Ward. We're also part of the Stogan people of East Galway. So he's going to actually entertain as well with some stories, some fabulous stories. Wonderful entertainer indeed. So that's Friday, and then on Saturday we do what we did last year also, and that is that we have a guided tour of the principal Mannion clan sites that are featured in the booklet. One very important site that we visited last year, we'll visit it again this year, and that is Rahmore. It's in the townland of Mullaghmore. There was a very important, late indeed, Brehon law deed drawn up here in 1584 for 2 branches of the Mannion clan who were disputing a piece of land called Clann Uí Mhainnín at the time. Last year we had, if you like, a little bit of pageantry in that we had the deed. The deed has survived, and there's a translation of it published in the Tribes and Customs of Imani. So we had it read last year by my son Patrick, and something like that will take place again this year.
Absolutely fascinating. Yeah. And can anyone go, or what do you have to do? How do you buy tickets, or what do you do?
Well, we're not in the business of selling tickets as such, Lorna. Anybody can attend. In actual fact, we have great support from 2 or 3 local heritage groups here. Skahana District Heritage Group, for example, who put on the first talk in Menla for us, and my Law Heritage Group also. So it's open to anybody to attend. We will be in the Abbey in Abbeynock on the 19th.
Perfect.
Last year we certainly had others who are not, we'll say, of the Mannion surname, but yet a wonderful interest in the local history. So
I would have a huge interest in that, because this tells you genealogically, like you can look at the Mannion variants as well, and just can you give us some Mannion variants? Would Mangan be a variant for you, or is it a different name?
It's mostly a different name, but indeed it was one of the variants that was used.
Yeah.
Now, another very important one that has been used particularly in America, although in England and indeed in Ireland also, is Manning, Manning.
Very interesting.
Yes, and we have actually a Manning brother and sister who are coming over from the States to attend this year, and he very clearly has stated that when his ancestors arrived in America, they were Mannions, Mannion.
Yes.
But to avoid discrimination, they actually changed the name to Manning.
And this is something I come across, especially maybe it's perhaps the Galway pronunciation, and my own roots are Galway actually originally from my father's side, so I would know this difference of the accent being, and Fahy, for example, becomes Fay.
Oh, yes.
So it's something that I've done some recent work on it, and there's been a show on it with the dispossessed and so on around that area. And what we see is a corruption of the names happening. So you do get Mannion becoming Manning. And for our overseas listeners and visitors to Ireland, this is something that's really important. How names change when you have passenger lists and bits and pieces and things that go on like that. When people travel, things change according to sound and by accent, and going to new places and fitting in and making life easy for yourself when you're going to a new place so that you can get on the best way you can.
That's right.
So absolutely fascinating stuff. And Joe is currently in the process of writing a comprehensive history of the Mannion clan, which will be published in the near future. I really look forward to this. And in the meantime, some preliminary information on the Mannions can be accessed at www.mannion.clan.org. So we'll put a link on this to the podcast today. And there's also a facebook.com/the Mannion Clan and www.clansofIreland.ie. These are really important links for when you're looking for locational analysis and to be able to research, well, what pocket did people come from and where did they originate from before they ever emigrated and so on. It can be a fascinating, emotional and passionate journey for those who would have left for hundreds of years to be able to find some link to their past. So Joe, thank you very much for being on today and being such a wonderful guest. And I know I'll be having you on again in my Series 5, which will be Clans and Surnames of Ireland. And we'll be starting that in September because we're just coming really to the end of Series 4 for the next few weeks and so on. So thank you very much, Joe.
You're very welcome, Lorna, and thank you. I'm privileged and honoured to be here.
Thank you very much. So that was Joe Mannion, and Joe spoke very well at our genealogy summer school last year, and will be speaking at the Merriman Genealogy Summer School because we'll be having one of those in May next year, and I'll be giving you a lot more information about that as time goes on. So just to keep you in the loop with us, you can gain access through our podcasted shows, all of them for the Genealogy Radio Show. You can text us at 089 422 8491, email at info@rcb.ie, and tune in to all the other shows on www.rcb.ie as well. We're on Facebook, RCB Radio, and Twitter, Radio CB. Thank you very much for listening today, and we'll be back next week.
Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family, 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 family tree.